The reason the graduate programs were so great was because we had great researchers and great minds at Berkeley. And therefore, if I use those minds, if I access those minds, I could bring an average undergraduate degree up to a above average undergraduate degree, because I'd have access to these great minds that were really making the difference in these programs. It was very interesting in this sense. I noticed a lot of my fellow students they didn't go to office hours. They didn't talk with the professors after class. Now, I did. I talked to the professors after class. I would walk with the professors from the classroom back to their office. And I started doing this a lot with the philosophy professors. One example was I had a class by Paul Feyerabend, who's a famous anarchist and philosopher of science. I didn't know that at the time. I believe the course was ancient philosophy or something, not necessarily his expertise or that he's famous for. But what I did notice is he was a very interesting guy, and I had no idea he was world famous at that point. But I could walk with him. He walked with a cane and he limped. It was rather, slow walking. And we had long talks from the class back to his office. And I knew that with him or any of these professors, I didn't even have to shove in there and be the first one to ask a question after class. I could let all the people that were panicked about an assignment or something ask their questions, and within 5 minutes, maybe 10, it would be he and I alone walking. These kinds of conversations were just as formative as my classes, I think. Now, during my time there, I started to learn that all of these principles that I had discovered from science, philosophical principles, and that I was applying in my philosophy courses and papers, turns out there was a tradition. It was the tradition of skepticism. Now, I would freak out the graduate students. I had one graduate student scream at me once in philosophical analysis section, where we had a one-on-one section, just you and the grad student for a half an hour reading, going over your words, trying to help you make strong arguments, that I was trying to set myself up as master. Or there was another grad student, I was defending a paper once, thought I got too low of a grade on. She did raise, where she screamed, "Hey, you're not following our tradition," which was funny because I felt, well, skepticism is a Western tradition. It was never the mainstream, but it's an ancient Western tradition, and so I disagreed. I had found out I did have a tradition. But it was funny because when I went to school, I thought, yeah, philosophy's bullshit. I don't have a philosophical tradition. I'm trying to do something useful with philosophy, have something tangible, an empirical philosophy, a more scientifically friendly philosophy. And not a philosophy of science, but really a philosophy where you look at science and you draw the metaphors and meaning from science. So if you want to be a relativist in philosophy, you ought to look at relativism in science and apply the scientific relativism as a metaphor to the real world. And I thought I was creating all this. Well, it turns out no, there's a history of science where physics comes from natural philosophy. And the natural philosophers had consciously chosen the skeptical epistemology because that was the most difficult epistemology that they could present. And it would allow the fact that the natural philosophers came from all different kinds of schools of philosophy. Skepticism was something that provided some compatibility. So, for example, let's say I believe in God and you believe in something else, and we both see the rainbow, and I'm studying the rainbow, and I'm looking at the rainbow, and I think God has caused the rainbow, and you think, no, something else, water has caused the rainbow. And we both study it. We study it very closely. Well, obviously, I can do things like I can enumerate what colors are in there. I can even notice that, there is water up there, and it's refracting light, it's refracting through the water. I can notice all those things through my perceptions and argue for them skeptically. And then at the point that I've done that, I tell you all the data. You accept the data. We all accept data. But after that point, it's going to be like, look, it's water refracting all this, but I'm still going to say, and God is causing all that to happen. You're going to say, no, it's this other thing. And we disagree there. That's our school of philosophy and how we disagree. But in terms of the facts, you can share facts. It doesn't matter if you think something's happening because of God's will or fate or randomness. You can take the facts from, Sherlock Holmes and you can share the facts with everybody. And if somebody's going to say, oh, well, yeah, and those facts came about that way because of fate of God, or because of a fate of physical determinism, or there is no fate and it was random, and that's still how it happened, you can all share your facts that way. So I took about 2.5 years of physics full-time and about 3 years of math full-time, and by which I mean at the same rate of classes that a major takes. I could have declared either of those majors. But by then I had become enamored with the logic and the philosophy. And so I finished my philosophy degree, and I have a philosophy degree from Berkeley. The program for me, as I said, heavy in math and science, also in logic. I took every logic course that I could. And this is actually somewhat relevant to what I do here. I'm exposed to logic. I'm exposed to this metaphysical idea, a priori truth. They taught me all of that, and they even tried to indoctrinate me to it. And it's funny to me when people think, hey, Piro's just overreacting to this theistic woo-woo kind of idea of metaphysics. And he's holding against all metaphysics, and he just doesn't understand this technical meaning of metaphysics from Plato or Aristotle or traditional Western philosophy. And as I said, I often recognize that those people are not very well formally educated, or else they'd recognize that my arguments against metaphysics go the other way. My arguments against metaphysics are philosophical, analytical arguments about metaphysics. I apply that to how I think of theistic metaphysics, because I do think there is a relationship. Christianity is Platonism for the masses. And that's what is meant by that statement, that if you are creating a world of idealizations, then yes, you need a place for that world, and you end up with a world of forms. You end up with an abstract space that has some sort of physical, metaphorical physical nature, but no actual material physical nature. And therefore you need this world of form. You need something like a heaven. It doesn't have to be a reward for when you die, and those aspects don't have to be there. But it does have to sort of be this place, a place that something can go, but you physically can't go. And yet you have access to it. So then it makes us somehow spiritual and metaphysical creatures, because, if A equals A is a metaphysical truth with no justification from the material world, it's just true in itself, somehow my mind is accessing that. So that means I have access to these metaphysical worlds. Somehow we're back into a dualism where I'm both in that metaphysical world and yet it's intangible. I'm touching it and yet it can't be touched. So what other experiences, I guess, were valuable for me there? As I said, I slowly learned about skepticism, and I think the culmination was, I believe, my senior year. I was in a seminar with a logician named Benson Mates, who was translating the outlines of Pyrrhonism. And he had a seminar. He was a professor emeritus, but he had this seminar to help him with his translation, which he was doing during his retirement years for fun. And there was only like 8 of us in the class, including the professor, and we basically simply discussed his translation and the outlines of Pyrrhonism. It was a wonderful thing. I mean, we got to talk about translations, issues about should you translate idioms, should you leave things pretty much literal, do you translate the grammar, how much do you let the user learn the grammar? These are questions that have traditional answers in the world of translation, but in the world of philosophy it's a little bit more difficult. How much do you want to change the book so that it's readable and accessible to the local culture? And how much do you not want to do that because it's a philosophy book and the reader is supposed to adapt to the ideas? You want to give the chance for a reader, a serious reader, to maybe even learn skills that they need to learn in order to read the meaning. And then, of course, we were talking a lot about skepticism. And this professor was not a skeptic. He was an old logical positivist. There were a lot of those there, in the 90s, aging. They knew it was an interesting thing, the logical positivists. But they are fascinated, many of them, like Bertrand Russell, with skepticism because of its logical impeccability. And this professor, Benson Mates, had a skeptic philosopher friend he told us a lot about. He was very sympathetic to skeptics and skepticism, but he himself was not a skeptic.